He thought wealth could buy him anything, that arrogance could humiliate without consequence. But he had no idea that one woman's power and dignity would turn his world upside down. The gala was glittering, chandeliers casting shimmering light across the room, guests sipping champagne, exchanging polite smiles and whispers. I had just arrived, meticulously dressed in a tailored designer gown, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The air was thick with expectation. This was supposed to be the event that sealed a $500 million deal, a partnership that could change the future of my company forever. And then he appeared, Alexander. The rich boy who believed entitlement was a birthright. He didn't walk, he swaggered, arrogance radiating from every step. His laugh loud and invasive, turning heads as he moved through the crowd. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the board members and potential investors, making sure every word I said carried weight, authority, control. But I couldn't ignore him for long. The moment our eyes met, I knew trouble was coming. His smirk was calculating, predatory, daring. I should have left. I should have moved to another room. But I stood my ground, my posture perfect, my composure unwavering. And then it happened. A miscalculated gesture, or maybe it was intentional, I would never know. He lifted his glass of red wine with a flourish as if mocking the entire world, and poured it, deliberately, aggressively, directly onto my dress. The rich silk gown, the one I had spent months commissioning, now soaked in dark red liquid, spreading like wildfire across the fabric. Gasps filled the room, murmurs rising. His parents, standing nearby, laughed at my shock, my anger, my humiliation. Their amusement was venomous, their pride in his audacity clear. For a brief moment I felt exposed, furious, my authority under assault, in front of hundreds of influential guests. But then I breathed. I straightened my spine, looked him directly in the eyes, and refused to let him see me break. This wasn't just about wine, about a ruined gown, about embarrassment. This was about respect, control, and showing that arrogance has consequences. I could feel the crowd watching, sensing the tension, waiting for a reaction. My fingers itched, not for revenge, but for the calm power of measured response. He thought the room was his playground. He thought his wealth, his status, his privilege could humiliate me and I would crumble. But he had underestimated me. The CEO, the woman who built her empire from the ground up, who fought every battle with wit, intelligence, and courage, would not bow. My dress was ruined, but my dignity was intact. My mind raced, calculating, strategizing. Every guest was watching, every investor, every board member, every potential ally, every competitor. This moment could destroy him socially, professionally, personally, and I intended to make sure it did. But first, I needed composure. Calm, unwavering, untouchable. I took a slow breath, allowed the shock to pass, and then I smiled. Not a timid smile, not a forgiving one. A smile that radiated control, authority, and impending consequences. Alexander's parents laughed again, oblivious, confident that wealth could shield their son from embarrassment. They were about to learn a lesson money couldn't buy, a power they hadn't anticipated, and a woman whose authority could not be challenged by arrogance alone. That smile was only the beginning. The real response, the one that would change the night, the deal, and perhaps his entire life, was coming. The room was frozen, the clinking of glasses replaced by a heavy silence as Alexander's parents continued to laugh, their amusement cruel, entitled, unaware of the storm about to hit. I felt every eye in the room on me, whispers slicing through the air like invisible knives. My dress was ruined, my body drenched, but my mind was sharper than ever. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate, and I would respond deliberately. I straightened my shoulders, walked toward Alexander, heels clicking like a metronome, and let the silence stretch, letting the room absorb the tension. Every step I took was calculated, every movement a display of control, authority, and unwavering composure. He smirked, thinking this was his moment of victory, that wealth and arrogance could humiliate and overpower me. But he had underestimated the force of a woman who had built an empire from nothing, a woman who knew the value of patience, strategy, and timing. My hand lifted slowly, brushing the ruined fabric from my shoulder, my eyes locking on his, unflinching, piercing. "Do you realize what you've done?" I asked softly, almost a whisper, but it carried through the hall, amplified by the tension, demanding attention. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, a crack in his confidence, though he quickly masked it with bravado. "It's just a dress," he scoffed, attempting to reclaim control, to laugh, to dismiss me. But I didn't flinch. My gaze swept the room, landing on every influential investor, every board member, every potential ally, silently signaling that arrogance would not go unpunished tonight. I raised my hand higher, commanding attention, letting the room know that my authority was absolute. "You've just made a very expensive mistake," I said, voice steady, controlled, yet lethal in its calm. Alexander's parents froze, confusion replacing laughter, sensing that this was no ordinary confrontation. I could see it, the realization dawning that this woman, this CEO, could dismantle reputations, deals, and influence with nothing more than her presence, her words, her strategic mind. Alexander tried to step forward to regain control, but I didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The room's energy shifted, subtly, powerfully. The laughter stopped, replaced by uneasy murmurs, eyes darting between him and me. I leaned slightly closer, my words a whisper now only he could hear, but the effect was seismic. "You might have wealth, you might have privilege, but respect, authority, influence that is earned. And tonight, you've forfeited your credibility in front of everyone who matters." His parents. Faces turned pale, their arrogance crumbling as they realized that their son had overstepped, that wealth could not shield him from consequences when the wrong person was involved. I straightened fully, letting my calm authority radiate outward, sending a silent message. "To everyone present, power is not money. It is composure, intellect, and courage." The murmurs in the room grew louder, guests exchanging glances, whispers of admiration and shock, understanding that this was a turning point, a moment that would be remembered long after the gala ended. Alexander, stunned, realized for the first time that humiliation could have consequences money could never fix. His eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear, a recognition of his miscalculation. And just as the tension peaked, I delivered the final strike, not with words, not with anger, but with action. I reached into my bag, pulling out the contract for the Peimhinger-Dungern deal, flipping it open, showing every signature, every clause, every binding agreement. "You wanted a spectacle," I said calmly. "Here it is. You now understand that power is T inherited it as demonstrated. Respect isn't T bought it as commanded. And deals, influence, credibility, none of it survives recklessness." The room absorbed the impact, the crowd realizing that this woman had not just survived humiliation, she had transformed it into a demonstration of authority, strategy, and control. Alexander, as parents, could only stare, powerless as the realization settled in. And I knew at that moment the tide had shifted. The balance of power had changed, the lesson delivered, and my dominance, my authority, my reputation intact, stronger than ever before. The night was far from over, but the first move, the decisive move, had been made. And the world would never look at Alexander the same way again. The crowd was still murmuring, the echo of my words settling over the gala like a storm warning. Alexander froze, realizing that his arrogance had not only humiliated me but also made him a laughingstock among every influential person in the room. His parents stood behind him, faces pale, whispers of disbelief passing between them. I didn't give them a chance to recover. Calm, precise, I stepped closer, heels clicking on the marble, letting every eye follow my movement. The room was mine now. The energy shifted, authority radiating from every gesture, every breath. Alexander attempted a smug smile, as if he could regain control with a joke or charm, but I cut him off. before he could speak. "Do you think this is a game?" I asked softly, my voice smooth, controlled, but razor-sharp beneath the calm surface. "That wealth can shield you from consequences? That arrogance can protect you from reality? That humiliation can be ignored?" I let the question hang in the air, letting every guest feel the weight of it. His parents shifted uncomfortably, glances darting toward the investors, their faces betraying panic. They finally understood this was not a scene they could dismiss or laugh away. I reached into my bag again, pulling out my phone, a message waiting, sent just moments ago. The room held its breath as I read aloud, "Deal cancelled, all signatures revoked. Terms null and void. You no longer have my partnership, nor any claim to this investment." The crowd gasped, some audibly, some exchanging wide-eyed glances, the tension thick enough to touch. Alexander's jaw dropped, his smug confidence replaced with disbelief and fear. His parents' laughter vanished instantly, replaced by frantic whispers, confusion, panic, their empire of social dominance cracking under the pressure. I watched him struggle for words, to salvage the moment, to defend his pride, but the truth was undeniable. Wealth could not save him. Power could not protect him. Authority was not inherited, and I had demonstrated it perfectly, calmly, methodically, publicly. I let a moment pass, letting the silence crush him, letting the room fully absorb the shift in power. Then I leaned slightly closer, voice low, each word deliberate. "This is a lesson, Alexander. Humiliation can be fleeting, but the consequences of arrogance are permanent when confronted by someone who respects themselves." His eyes widened, desperation creeping in, hands twitching at his sides. Thoughts racing across his mind as he realized the depth of his miscalculation. He had treated me as an object, a spectacle, something to laugh at, something to humiliate. And now, everyone present knew exactly who held the power. His parents looked like statues, frozen, their social superiority stripped bare, revealing the insecurity and entitlement beneath. I could feel the energy of the investors shifting, their respect moving solidly to me, their understanding clear. This woman was unshakable, formidable, and no one would dare underestimate her again. Alexander finally found his voice, a forced, shaky attempt at control, but it faltered instantly against the calm authority I maintained. I didn't mean," he stammered, useless words, failing to reverse the tide. I raised my hand, silencing him, my gaze unwavering. "Intentions are meaningless without respect, and respect is earned, not bought or assumed," I said, letting my tone ring with authority and finality. His parents looked at him, their faces pale, their laughter gone, replaced by the stark reality that their privilege and arrogance had failed spectacularly. The room was watching history unfold, a lesson in humility, power, and control. And I knew this was only the beginning. The public humiliation had ended, but the consequences, the shift in status, the recalibration of power, it was permanent. Alexander had been shown unequivocally that entitlement was no shield against authority, that arrogance was no protection against dignity, and that one moment of recklessness could erase years of perceived dominance. I allowed myself a small, controlled breath, letting the moment solidify, letting every guest recognize the truth. Wealth does not equal power. Arrogance does not equal control. And no one, not even Alexander, could outmaneuver the consequence of disrespect when faced with unshakable authority. The murmurs grew into whispers of awe, a subtle applause of recognition. The message was clear, concise, undeniable. The night had changed forever, not because of the wine, not because of the dress, but because one woman refused to be humiliated and turned the spectacle into her statement of power. The room remained still, the echoes of my words lingering like a storm that had passed but left destruction in its wake. Alexander slumped, his ego shattered, his parents frozen in disbelief. The laughter that had once filled the room completely gone. Investors and guests whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that spoke volumes, admiration subtly shifting toward me, their respect earned through authority and composure, not wealth or status. I walked calmly toward the exit, each step deliberate, signaling to everyone present that the night belonged to me now, that power and dignity had been demonstrated in full force, and no further confrontation was necessary. Alexander attempted to follow, pleading, gestures flailing, but I ignored him, my focus absolute, my presence commanding. The silence more devastating than any words could be. His parents tried to intervene, offering excuses, attempting to salvage some fragment of pride, but their voices carried no weight, their entitlement evaporating under the undeniable truth that arrogance has consequences, that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. As I approached my car, whispers followed me, eyes tracking my every movement, a subtle acknowledgement that the narrative had changed completely, that the spectacle had become a lesson in strategy, poise, and authority. I paused at the door, looking back one final time, observing the defeated faces, the subtle realization dawning that money could never buy the respect and power I had demonstrated. Alexander. His parents avoided my gaze, their confidence eroded, their laughter forever silenced by the impact of one calm, strategic response. In that moment I felt a rush of clarity, the weight of control and empowerment settling over me like armor, proof that composure and intelligence outweigh privilege and arrogance every time. The deal had been canceled, the humiliation delivered, the lesson clear, yet my mind was already calculating the next steps, ensuring that authority and influence were consolidated, that no future attempt to undermine me could succeed. Guests slowly began to regain composure, the murmurs of respect growing louder, subtle nods exchanged, an unspoken recognition that the CEO, the woman they had underestimated, had not only survived humiliation but transformed it into a spectacle of power, leaving everyone who witnessed it aware that arrogance has limits, that wealth is not a shield, and that dignity and authority are forces beyond measure. Alexander remained frozen, a portrait of entitlement undone. While I stood tall, every inch a symbol of poise and command, the world watching, learning, acknowledging that true power does not require a voice raised in anger, only a mind unshaken, a plan executed flawlessly, and the courage to turn humiliation into triumph. As the night drew toward its quiet conclusion, I felt a subtle shift in the air. The energy of the room transformed, the narrative rewritten, and the lesson embedded permanently into every observer's memory. I stepped out into the night, calm, collected, aware that every moment of composure had not only salvaged my dignity but strengthened my influence, proving unequivocally that respect cannot be bought, arrogance can be defeated, and the consequences of underestimating authority are unavoidable. Alexander's parents lingered, faces pale, the laughter that had once defined them extinguished, and I knew that this night would echo long after. The lights dimmed, a testament to strategic courage, measured response, and the undeniable power of a woman who refused to be humiliated. The next morning, the aftermath of last night's gala weighed heavily on everyone involved. Alexander and his parents were silent, their arrogance replaced by anxiety, whispers of fear, and endless calculations of how to recover from the public humiliation. I arrived at the office, heels clicking against the marble floor, mind sharp, focus absolute. Every glance from my executive team acknowledged the shift they had witnessed, not only my composure but the strategic dismantling of a powerful rival's influence in front of the entire business community. Alexander arrived shortly after, a carefully rehearsed smile plastered on his face, attempting to regain some semblance of control. But the room, and more importantly, the board of investors, had already recalibrated their respect. He tried to speak, to apologize, to charm, but every word faltered under the weight of the previous night's events. I motioned for him to sit, calm, deliberate, every action radiating authority. "You understand now," I said, voice steady, eyes locking on his, "that wealth and entitlement are no substitute for respect and competence, that arrogance and impulsivity have consequences, and that your actions last night have changed everything." His parents watched from the sidelines, their faces pale, whispers up, panic escaping as they realized the full scale of their misjudgment. I continued, systematically outlining the implications of his behavior, not just the canceled deal, but the trust, credibility, and influence he had lost with every major investor present. I let the silence stretch, letting the tension suffocate him, letting the reality of the situation sink in fully. "This isn't personal," I said, tone calm yet deadly precise. "It's business. And in business, mistakes like yours cost more than money. They cost reputation, opportunity, and alliances." He tried again to argue, to bargain, but every word was countered calmly, logically, leaving him exposed, powerless, and visibly frustrated. The investors in the room began to murmur, subtle nods acknowledging the lesson being delivered, understanding that authority is demonstrated, not assumed, and that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned through competence, strategy, and integrity. Alexander's parents leaned closer, whispering urgently, attempting to salvage their son's position. But even their combined influence could not undo the impact of last night. I allowed the weight of the moment to settle, giving him a final opportunity to accept responsibility, to acknowledge the consequences, to demonstrate humility. "You may have wealth," I said softly, voice controlled yet resonant, "but you cannot buy credibility, repair broken trust, or demand respect that you have forfeited. What you do now will determine whether you ever regain any influence in this community." The room was silent, every ear straining, every observer captivated, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Alexander's shoulders slumped, his ego cracked, desperation flickering in his eyes as he finally realized that no charm, no money, no influence could erase the lesson he had been taught. His parents were defeated, their whispers futile, their confidence gone, replaced by the cold understanding that they had miscalculated the wrong person, underestimated the wrong woman. I leaned back slightly, calm, deliberate, allowing the room to witness the full display of composure, authority, and control. The subtle power shift was complete. The lesson had been delivered, consequence fully visible, and the narrative rewritten permanently. Alexander understood that his reputation, influence, and any claim to dominance had been stripped away with a quiet, calculated force, demonstrating that humility, strategy, and intelligence outweigh entitlement and arrogance every time. The investors, the guests, and even Alexander's parents acknowledged silently that authority is not inherited, power is not assumed, and arrogance has limits that even wealth cannot overcome. I gave him one final glance, voice low and steady, words carrying the weight of inevitability. "Learn from this, or you will never recover." The room exhaled collectively, tension shifting into recognition, respect, and awe. Alexander sat defeated, powerless, humbled, while I stood tall. Every inch the CEO, the strategist, the woman who had transformed humiliation into an unassailable demonstration of authority, leaving no doubt that respect must be earned, mistakes have consequences, and composure is a weapon far more powerful than arrogance. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategic realignment. Alexander avoided my office, knowing that any confrontation would be futile, that the authority I had demonstrated was not fleeting but permanent. His parents tried discreet attempts to communicate, offering excuses, subtle persuasion, even small gestures of compromise, but I remained unshaken, every decision deliberate, calculated, demonstrating that control had shifted entirely. Investors who had been silent before now approached me, congratulating me discreetly on handling the situation with composure, intelligence, and precision. Board members sought guidance, advice, and counsel, acknowledging that my strategic mind and calm authority had not only prevented disaster but also enhanced our standing in the business community. Alexander's humiliation became a quiet legend within the network, a cautionary tale whispered in hallways and boardrooms, a reminder that arrogance has limits and that wealth cannot shield incompetence or disrespect. I scheduled a private meeting with the investors affected by last night's canceled deal, presenting a revised plan, stronger, more comprehensive, and demonstrating foresight and strategy. Their trust in me deepened, respect solidified, and the financial impact of Alexander's actions was mitigated completely, proving that decisive leadership and strategic thinking always outweigh rash behavior and entitlement. Meanwhile, Alexander attempted to regain his social footing, attending events with a forced smile, but every guest, every peer, every investor remembered the lesson. The laughter of last night's incident had transformed into silent acknowledgement of authority, and he realized painfully that the balance of influence had irrevocably shifted. At home, I reflected on the entire ordeal, the stress, the confrontation, the strategic victory, and the personal empowerment it had given me. I realized that true strength is measured not by aggression or entitlement, but by patience, intelligence, and the ability to turn a moment of vulnerability into a demonstration of power. My team celebrated quietly, acknowledging the clarity of purpose and leadership I had displayed, and I allowed myself a small, private smile, knowing that respect, once earned, cannot be taken away. Alexander's parents, humbled and visibly shaken, eventually reached out, not with arrogance but with acknowledgement of the miscalculation and a subtle gesture of apology, signaling the complete closure of their attempts to dominate or undermine me. Social circles began to shift subtly, alliances reconsidered, and every event thereafter reinforced the lesson: composure, intelligence, and authority are unassailable when wielded with precision and patience. I met Alexander one final time, in a controlled, professional setting, to finalize the consequences and ensure that all misunderstandings and disputes were resolved decisively. He was quiet, reflective, and for the first time, fully aware of the impact of his actions and his entitlement. I allowed him to speak, to express regret, but I did not offer excuses. I did not allow bargaining. The lesson had been learned and cemented, and my authority had been validated completely. As I walked away from the meeting, the weight of control and victory settled over me like armor, every step a statement of composure, strategy, and undeniable power. The finality of the moment was palpable, the humiliation, the arrogance, and the entitlement of the past had been replaced with recognition, respect, and an unshakable understanding of authority. My name and reputation had been solidified not through confrontation alone, but through the calm, deliberate orchestration of every move, every word, and every observation, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind about who held the true power. Alexander's parents finally understood the cost of underestimating me. Alexander himself internalized the lesson, and every observer, every investor, every guest who witnessed the unfolding saga knew that arrogance and entitlement could never override strategy, composure, and intelligence. In the end, victory was not about revenge, it was about asserting authority, demanding respect, and demonstrating unambiguously that power is earned, humility is respected, and composure is unassailable. The story concluded not with bitterness, but with clarity, closure, and empowerment. I had turned humiliation into triumph, disrespect into authority, and arrogance into a permanent lesson on consequence, leaving everyone involved changed, aware, and reminded that the combination of intelligence, patience, and strategic execution is the ultimate demonstration of strength. As I stepped into the calm of the evening, reflecting on the journey, I knew that the balance of power, once disrupted, had been restored with precision, dignity, and unwavering authority, and that every individual who had doubted or underestimated me had witnessed, without question, the undeniable truth of what it means to command respect, influence, and legacy.